are joined now by Dan Favale of Bleacher Report and the host of the Hardwood Knocks podcast. Make sure to go check out all of his work over there. Dan's covering the New York Knicks for us at the Alley Oop. Really excited to have you on, Dan, and really excited to talk about the Knicks because holy hell, like this team is out of nowhere, off the top rope, just like really freaking fun again.
Yeah, nothing really happened with them since we last spoke. They didn't make any trades or anything like that. So it's just weird how they turn things around. But yeah, they've been, even with all the injuries that have started to mount up, they've been a blast to watch.
You know, it's funny. I recorded with you. I recorded with Esfandiar Barahini, who does Toronto for us, and those both came right before the OG trade. Just right before. I couldn't get either of your guys' perspectives on it at that threshold. But it's so funny, man. Like that, this team is 15-3 since he first suited up, and like the numbers are just out of this world on both sides of the floor. Like it's just insane to see how such a better fit can really impact the team in a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, the defensive fit's been obvious. They're second in points allowed per possession since that. And I mean, he hasn't played in a few games because of his elbow stuff.
Yeah.
Look, his impact on defense is, I know a lot of people have now started saying, oh, he's playing harder than he was in Toronto. And he might be, but I still thought he was a really great defender this season for the most part. So he's doing those things. And that has a trickle-down effect on everyone else and their responsibilities. I think Josh Hart, specifically, that's someone who makes his life a lot easier. Offensively, though, and Chris Herring wrote a piece about this for ESPN Plus. I think we all probably underestimated what he would do to the offense just by virtue of giving you a player who is so lower usage and doesn't work with the ball in his hands, especially when he's coming to a new team and doesn't have time to practice, that it makes everything hum a little bit more. It's not just having a better cutter than RJ. It's, well, now you have more touches and shots to go around for a Dante DiVincenzo, for a Josh Hart. And I think you've kind of seen that. And part of that's Emmanuel quickly going out too. That's someone else who would have the ball in his hands a lot when he's on the court. And you do miss some of that element when you see it in a few of the bench lineups that they're running, or when Deuce McBride isn't having a good game. But to now have someone who is lower usage on the offensive end than the primary that you sent out for him, which is just, he was the RJ replacement, the RJ upgrade button. It's had sort of this profound impact on the pecking order and the fluidity with which they play on offense, to where if they could end up, you know, even if they don't, because this podcast, like, let's not try and date it past the trade deadline, but if you get another ball handler, or even if you don't, like, this team just might be good enough to make more noise than we expected with OG, because it's not just about what he brings defensively anymore.
It's not. And like, it just feels like the floor balance is a lot better. You're putting Jalen Brunson into better positions to succeed, and he's taking full advantage of that. You're putting Julius Randle in better positions to succeed. I was always thinking that, man, RJ and Julius kind of share the same spots on the floor a lot of the time, and just having a guy in OG who could just either stand in the opposite corner or stand on the wing, and you have to honor him as a threat from out there, is a really, really important aspect of this. So I love what I've seen from them, and like, love what I've seen from Jalen Brunson, who is now the king of New York, basically. Like, this dude is on an entirely new planet in terms of how he's discussed, how he's talked about, and the kind of impact that he continues to make. He's officially an all-star this year, and probably deserved to be a starter if we're being honest. So what can you say about his personal growth and how it's sort of changed how people view the Knicks?
Yeah, look, I think even critics of his signing, and I was among them, for me it had nothing to do with the money. It was, well, what does this signal about your organization that you went this hard after the 40th best player in the NBA?
Right.
And it's, maybe they saw this, maybe they didn't, but now you're talking about someone who might be the 15th or 20th best player in the NBA. And that's a big deal. And so you look at what he's doing now. You mentioned the better floor balance, even with Julius Randle kind of out, and now you just don't really have anyone trying to occupy the same space as you, or work from the same side of the floor. That's opened things up for him. I think the biggest thing we've noticed is the three-point shooting, and not just as a three-point shooter, but as a functional off-the-dribble three-point shooter. He's one of the most efficient in the league at that shot this year when you're looking at the actual volume to it. That's a trademark skill. And to have that, in addition to all the in-between stuff that you can do, being able to work through traffic, getting into the mid-range, making passes from there, getting defenders to leave their feet, getting defenders on your back hip, it's just like an entire offensive package that I never would have predicted when he first signed there. And it changes the calculus of, well, what type of player everyone's just saying they need a player they're waiting. They are waiting on a blockbuster. Like that, it's very clear they're trying to roll salary slots into different salary slots. It's very clear that they are waiting on a bigger move. But now that conversation has gone from, well, we need a player who is better than Jalen Brunson to, well, can you find someone who's as good or almost as good as Jalen Brunson? And maybe that's just enough based off the depth we would still have and whether Julius Randle is still there or not following said deal. And ideally, I think yes. I know that's caused a lot of we talked about it because I don't know who had said something about him being a championship player at that point or not the best player on a title team. Was it was
It was
that
it was Becky Hammond
Becky
actually.
Hammond? And then we saw
Yeah,
Candace Parker say something. Other people have said something, and like it might just be true because there are only like 10 players that can be the best player on a title team. So
sure.
it's not an insult, but I think that it does two things. Is it kind of opens up your options if you are looking for subsequent moves to where, well, maybe you don't need a caps lock megastar. You certainly don't need to look at, I know everyone wants to send Donovan Mitchell to the Knicks in the offseason, but like, even if he becomes available, you have Jalen Brunson. It's just like, why are you making that backcourt pairing? And then what it also allows you to do is operate with a stronger sense of urgency. You're not waiting to find someone who can open your title window. You're waiting to find someone who can wedge open the window that you have already opened even further. And that's what Jalen Brunson has honestly done over the past season plus in New York.
Knicks have definitely done a great job of facilitating that, of putting their guys into good positions. And one of the things with this OG trade is we talk about player rankings a lot, and we talk about, man, where's a guy in the spectrum of the league, the pecking order of the league. If they win a championship, he'll probably be viewed as like the 9th or 10th best player in the league because he probably averaged 30 points and 6 assists or something absurd like that in the spectrum. And like I tend to like let those conversations play out because as he continues to grow and improve and show off what he's capable of, like he was a top 8 playoff player last year just based off of the numbers that he was putting up and how consistent he was. And like you do that over and over and over again and the conversation just shifts around you. So I think that it's very fair, and I think he's wedging that door open, like you said, and the Knicks have done a great job. And what an OG trade does specifically, and maybe other moves in the future, is that when you provide that better balance, when you provide guys that fit better, it emphasizes the strengths of those guys, and those rankings that we're talking about, they're naturally just going to go up because everybody just looks so much better, despite the fact that it didn't really change much, but the ways that they were able to succeed certainly did.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it opens up a lot of different avenues. Is what it certainly does, and it'll be fascinating to see. OG is going to get the New York City bump in player rankings when we're talking about it in the when they invariably come up during the off season. But like the big thing there is now you need to see them do it in the playoffs essentially, and
Yeah.
we've seen that they can be scrappy in the playoffs. Beating Cleveland was no small shakes. I know people were just lampooning the Cavs last year, but like that was a good team that they went in and
It was.
they beat. And I think they are going to have some interesting decisions beyond the trade deadline. And the one that I just stare at a lot is I do think having Isaiah Hartenstein as your primary big, and you know this full well, not as your primary big, but you know this full well about him. He's more dynamic on the offensive end than Mitchell Robinson. And I'm just curious to see if and when Mitchell Robinson comes back, is he immediately slotted into the starting lineup? Is he playing more minutes of the two bigs? Because he changes a lot of what you can do offensively. And you might have to ask yourself, well, what is the real defensive drop off for us going from Mitchell Robinson to Hartenstein, especially when we have OG on the floor in a lot of these minutes? So there are still some things to kind of figure out. And just the bigger thing, we know Jalen Brunson's playoff track record, which is largely great. And if he somehow nudges this team to the conference finals, you're right to the player rankings point where it's he will shoot up. He'll probably be too high. Let's be honest. They'll
Sure,
probably rank
the
him too high.
overreaction will be strong. It will be very, very distinct for the New York market, but it's fine. Like that's what we're supposed to do in this situation. You react to what happened.
Yeah, but like the bigger thing for them is like, well, what does Julius Randle look like in the playoffs? What are you going to get from him? Because he's had bad postseasons. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
And if he is your second most important offensive player, that is a problem. And so do you need someone else to offset that? Do you need someone better than him to ensure that you have that number two? That's like too transactional at the moment because the Knicks have been so good. They're not even fully healthy as we're recording this, like not even close. But there are still questions to ask, but it's just the tenor of their direction. Even from last season, when everyone was pretty in agreement that this was a resounding success, I was skeptical of the Dante DiVincenzo addition. I was like, this is a good addition, but it's not going to open up the floor for you like you needed to. I was wrong. It's like this front office, and even Tom Thibodeau as a coach, who I called to be fired 7 games into last year,
Mm.
like they have done just a good job of identifying players, deploying them, and like even just the smarts with the front office, where it's like you were able to get OG while yes, giving up players who you consider blue chip prospects and RJ Barrett and Emmanuel quickly isn't nothing, but you've saved your picks, which are always the primary compensation in those trades you're looking to do. And what you were now trying to do, and we've seen them do on a couple of times, they were a little bit out in front of this, was having these contracts that are digestible enough to just move and match. And now they're kind of participating in what we've seen other teams get to. It's not about just having the expiring contract or the deal with the team option or the deal with one additional year left on it. It's about, does that player, is he actually good? And so can you get that guy who is useful to you now, but then he's also a great salary matcher? And that's why the Malcolm Brogdon stuff is so tantalizing for a team
Mm.
like New York. And their front office has been ahead of that stuff. And it's probably, look, I mean, like they probably haven't received enough credit over the past couple seasons based off what they tampered to get Jalen Brunson. Who the hell cares? Good for them. Everyone's tampering. My whole thing was you're going to tamper to get the 40th best player in the NBA. Well, you know what? The 40th best player in the NBA might be the 20th best player in the NBA now. So hats off. And people are finding the stuff I said at the time too, and they're railing me for it, and I love it. Like that's the stuff you just eat crow on. I don't think anyone predicted this from Jalen Brunson, even his own dad, when he went to New
Right.
York. But
Exactly.
it's like I'm just to wrap it up on this long rant for me is like the optionality that the Knicks have carved out. It's not just because of Jalen Brunson. It's because like the front office has done an actually good job of like keeping these optionality windows open. And it's look, I was a skeptic, and I think fans should have been a skeptic too. Of just like we'll believe it when we see it. And there's still that element of well, what is that eventual big move like? Are you ever going to make it? Going to look like? But now you can kind of trust that, well, they're not going to overpay. It's not going to be for the wrong player, I would guess, just based off how they've acted. And to have that confidence or just that level of like pleasant complacency, I would call it, in this team, even as like a fairly impartial bystander. I grew up a Knicks fan, but like this business has made me a deadingly disenchanted like Knicks fan. It's like I'm as impartial as a Knicks fan could be, I would say.
Sure.
They're there's just so many different pathways open to them now. And a huge Jalen Brunson is the meat and potatoes of it all, but I do think you have to tip your cap to the C-suiters, just for like kind of figuring out how to keep all these different options open and biding their time where it felt like, or are they waiting too long? And it was no. Like you didn't pay the price that Cleveland did for Donovan Mitchell because you weren't there yet. And now they might be that team. Like they might be the team where it's if the right player becomes available, yes, you go get him and you pay. Maybe it's a slightly inflated cost like Cleveland did because it makes you that caps lock title contender.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that look they handled this extremely well. Rather than so it's funny because I was recently on a pod for Knicks Film School talking about Carmelo Anthony and just the way that all went down. But the difference between that and how this is going down for New York right now is like when New York spent all of those assets to go get Carmelo rather than be patient and wait for him in free agency and do the right organizational thing for themselves. That really put them behind the eight ball in so many ways. It put them in such a disadvantage from an asset standpoint. And New York's just played this perfectly, where now you can really consider yourself a threat in the Eastern Conference. And especially with the where the East is right now, like there's a lot of uncertainty. Like with where Joel Embiid is at, who trusts Boston at this point, especially just watching them in the playoffs every year. Like Miami is not the same potent Miami, and Milwaukee just can't defend a chair. Like there's reasons to have some faith in a team like New York at this point, and I think they should continue to push, man. Like this is something that's going to be very, very fascinating as the trade deadline rolls around here real soon.
Yeah, I'm ready for anything with them, including them doing absolutely nothing.
Mm.
So it's just like, but like they might even just do the move where it's if a team is willing to give you a good enough pick that's not in the 2024 draft for Quentin Grimes, so that
Yeah,
you view that as a mystery box asset rather than having Quentin Grimes a player who I still really like. It's just will he take enough threes? Does he have any kind of ball skills? He's flashed them before, but he looks very indecisive. They could just do something like that. Is it just turning Evan Fournier into a better could be expiring salary for next year? Is it even looking at, I've mentioned Colin Sexton, who I like better for them than a Jordan Clarkson, where it's okay, his deal's a little bit longer, but the number's a good amount, and he's just balling right now. So he's
sure.
a quintessential, just like, let's supercharge our bench lineups right here. And he's not, no, he won't make a trade package, but like neither will Malcolm Brogdon. They're just money quality players that teams will look at and say, well, all right, they don't fit. It's what Portland did with Brogdon, essentially. We will take him. He doesn't really fit us right now. We'll use him, and they're going to eventually flip him for value, whether it's at the trade line or a trade deadline or over the offseason.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating possible addition. Just thinking about where the holes are for this Knicks team right now, because you mentioned the loss of Emmanuel quickly. That's definitely hurt in terms of the bench offense, but like you play a whole bunch of like you play your stars even more than the Knicks generally do in a playoff run. So I gotta imagine that you're really accounting for 8 to 12 minutes most of the time in these situations. And if you can help like your rotation and get a guy like Malcolm Brogdon, that would be great. Get a guy like Colin Sexton, that'd be great. But it also just like you don't have to be too pushy. And there are some other names that I think you could probably go for too.
Yeah, you make a great point there. And I mean, you cover the Nuggets, so you know this better than anyone.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with not just the Nuggets bench, but specifically like, oh, you got to get like a better backup big. And it's like, Jokic plays 40 minutes in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And then those other 8 are going to be filled by Aaron Gordon, who we've seen play more 5 in the regular season. So, no, you don't need to. If you don't want to go pay a first-round pick or Quentin Grimes to get someone who you don't think even has a chance of cracking any of your closing units or being your 6th most used player in the playoffs, then you don't do it. Even if it does kind of harm your product because you're not. So, yeah, as constructed, Zach Lowe has said this. It wouldn't shock me if they're the team that goes into the conference finals, if they're the team that wins it. Would I predict it? At the moment, no. But the fact that it's an option, that also affords you some flexibility to where it's, let's be more selective with what we're doing. And we don't necessarily need to, I mean, Malcolm Brogdon would instantly be someone who I would imagine could rank like among their top 6 most played players in the postseason. But that being said, if you don't think that you're actually ever going to close with him next to Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle and OG Anunoby, well, then like you do have to, within reason, like not give up too many assets for him or not be like, well, Quentin Grimes and a first round pick. Or so that's an interesting line to juggle, but it's also a really good problem to have.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. But I will also caution that like these windows can close just as quickly as they open. And for a team like the Knicks that is seemingly catching lightning in a bottle right now, you do not know what this like next iteration of the team is going to bring, as awesome as it looks right now. So like hypothetically, say a team makes a run at OG Anunoby and pays him a 4-year max and he's just gone. Like that would suck. That would be a horrible way for this thing to end. So might as well just continue to capitalize and do what you can to maximize what I think is this might be their best chance. This might be their best chance to win a title. And they have the juice, they have the assets, they've got the versatility, they've got the players. Might as well go for it, man, because I really do think that there is something special brewing here.
That's interesting because I don't know if I would call it their best chance because I still feel like they're a significant player short. And now if you can go out and get that, and you're looking at the East and saying, oh, Embiid is injured. You already said what the hell's going on in Milwaukee. Boston just doesn't feel trustworthy, like in crunch time and with their high variance shot selection. Maybe that does make them more aggressive than by default at the trade deadline. I will say if this becomes their best shot to win a title, my guess would be that they made some monster move, or that's just not an ideal thing to say, right, with where they're at right now, is because I do think they are still one significant player short. Or, I mean, like, you're putting a lot of weight on, one, Julius Randle getting healthy, and then two, him really performing up to snuff in the playoffs if you believe that this team is its best chance. And so that's what makes them so fascinating, though, is that they are so many different things to so many different people, and it all just depends on the lens through which you're looking.
Final thing here for you, hypothetically speaking. If a guy like Jimmy Butler were to just magically become available in the next 48 hours or so, do you think that this team should make a significant run at him and just try to pair him with a guy like Jalen Brunson? Because I think that there's some merit to both him being available and to this being a pretty good idea.
There's merit to his fit. Given his age, what's going to happen with his next contract, even his injury history, it has to be like a measured offer to where, like, if they want the full boat, if they want the Donovan Mitchell offer, if they want the Rudy Gobert offer for Jimmy Butler, which is a wild thing to say because over the past couple of years, he's been better than both of those players, and it's not really all that close. But, like, you have to be careful not to. We know these windows can close at any given moment, but you also want to give yourself an opportunity to keep them open as long as possible. And trading for a 34-year-old Jimmy Butler might not be the best way to do that. If the cost is right, sure. If he's demanding a trade and like limiting it to the New York market or something, you absolutely have to look. But that's not the I just don't view like that is maybe the type of player that they need, but like that timeline just gets super accelerated if you're giving, salary Quentin Grimes and however many first. Like if it's going to take like 4 or 5 first round picks and swaps to get Jimmy Butler, I know the Knicks have some to spare, and so if some of them are protected, like they're giving the ones that aren't theirs, and theirs down the line don't extend too far out. It's certainly something worth kicking around, especially given Tibbs's familiarity with it. I would just be, and it's the same thing with Embiid when Knicks fans have lusted over Embiid. Just given his injury, his dude's a fantastic player, but like given this stuff that goes on, I think you have to keep your offers more in check than if you were just going after. I don't love Donovan Mitchell for this team, but that type of player who's younger doesn't have that injury track record. And I will say, if Jimmy Butler becomes available, it'd be one of the biggest shocks in recent memory that I've seen at the deadline, just because for Miami to trade a first round pick and then end up dealing Jimmy Butler after doing so in the same season would just be bonkers stuff from my perspective.
It would be wild, man. But I do think that there's at least enough behind the scenes that you just never know what you're going to find. You never know what you're going to find at the deadline, and agendas can quickly flip, and things that you're not necessarily hearing up until that point, they become very real very quickly. So I would be interested in a Jimmy Butler reunion with Tom Thibodeau. Like that would be a fascinating idea, and then just playing as kind of that secondary guy with Jalen Brunson in New York. To me, that's a match made in heaven if you get the right deal across.
Let's hope it doesn't go anything like the reunion they had in Minnesota that ended quite poorly.
Tibbs and Jimmy 3. That's a good intro. Hopefully it's better than 2. Hopefully it's longer than 2. That's an interesting idea. Okay, well, hey, we will see what they do at the trade deadline, man. I'm very curious. But even if they don't do a thing, I want to reiterate this: the Knicks can, like, their title window's open. It is not like fake at this point. They have the talent to do it, and they've got the fit to do it, and they've got the defense to do it. Like there is a reasonable thing here that's going. You just got to get enough secondary scoring from the other guys, and we'll see whether they can.
Yeah, they're definitely one of the teams to watch for the rest of the year. Especially if they got to get healthy though. Like that's going to be the big thing with them.
We'll see if they can. He is Dan Favale of Bleacher Report. Make sure to go check out the podcast Hardwood Knocks wherever you get podcasts. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time. We'll chat again soon, all right?
Most definitely. Take care, Ryan. Talk to you soon.